Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Level Up, Elevating AI in the Enterprise. We'll start in a couple of minutes once we have all the attendees who are joining. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So Level Up, Elevating AI in the Enterprise. Today, we have our moderator, Ewen Plougastel, Managing Director of Accenture Applied Intelligence. We have also two speakers, Dr. Chris Marshall, Vice President Data Analytics and AI at IDC, and also Richard Jones, Vice President APAC at Dataiku. Basically, just a bit of housekeeping as a start. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll share the link after this webinar. At the heart and the core of this presentation, we have this IDC info brief. Chris Marshall will talk about it. We'll provide the link tomorrow. After this webinar with the recording, we'll provide a link to download this piece of document, and feel free to ask some questions on the platform since there is a Q&A session at the end. The agenda is around three topics. The first one is Chris talking about the data science trends in APAC. Then we'll have Richard Jones giving his feedback and his views from the AI trenches here in APAC. And we'll end up this webinar with a Q&A fireside chat between our three speakers. So as a start, Chris, maybe you can just introduce yourself and talk about the data science in APAC.
Sure. Thank you, Frederic. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name's Chris Marshall, and I'm delighted to be speaking here today. A few words about my background and why I'm here talking to you. I've had a long career as an academic computer scientist, mainly working in AI, and as a professional consultant and a systems manager, working at institutions as wide-ranging as Harvard and IBM and KPMG and Oracle. These days, I head up IDC's analytics and data and AI practice here in Asia. So today, what I want to talk about really is a summary of some of the trends that we see in the marketplace for data science and artificial intelligence more generally here in the region. And what I'm going to talk about today is really based on a survey that IDC did about earlier this year, talking to data scientists, AI practitioners here in the region. And before I get into the details of what we found, I think it's worth pointing out that this survey was done before the onset of COVID-19. And I have no doubts, we'll probably come back to this later in the session, I have no doubts that organizations have been obviously impacted by COVID-19. But in the longer term, I would argue that data science and artificial intelligence are not really short-term issues, and they are really strategic ones that have a lifespan far beyond COVID-19 and what's going to be happening the rest of the year. And I think everything we talk about today understood in that light. So when we did this survey, what we wanted to know really was what makes artificial intelligence and data science generally successful in an organization. And frankly, what tends to get in the way of making it successful. Now, to answer this question, we actually sent surveys out to more than 700 data scientists and data science managers in countries across Asia. Now, then we organized these materials in the form of a sort of a maturity assessment of the data science activities that are taking place in those organizations. I think it's also worth pointing out that the very fact that we had data science leaders to talk to, people on the ground involved in data science and AI, indicates that the people we talked to generally were a sample of relatively larger companies with at least basic AI and analytics and data science capabilities in place. So obviously a little bit of a biased sample. So all the statistics reflect the sample that we talk to, usually of relatively leading organizations like many of the people on this call who are doing work in this area. This does not address the entire population of companies that are doing anything on AI. That caveat in mind. So the details of everything I talk about today are to be found in the info brief that you can get online from Dataiku, and I believe that's available as of tomorrow. But in this short session, I want to highlight some of the most important themes that I would like you to take away. Now, the details really build upon the model, and the model that we used categorized companies into 5 distinct buckets of steadily increasing sophistication in terms of their data science and AI activities. Going from left to right, we identified about 18% of surveyed companies that were doing essentially simple experiments. Now, these data science experiments typically were at the POC stage. They were focusing on very specific use cases using relatively small, usually local, functional, or business unit-derived data sets. Once they got beyond that, 32% of the respondents we talked to were starting to slowly multiply their data science activities, often very opportunistically around large enterprise initiatives. And here are the ones that kept getting repeated again and again were digital transformation, automation, or customer relationship management and marketing analytics. So they were essentially using these enterprise initiatives to piggyback their AI initiatives. 25% of respondents were actually doing AI and data science projects repeatedly as part of their business. So they'd had some successes, probably some failures as well, and they were actually consistently delivering a number of smaller AI projects across the board. Only about 12% had actually started to consolidate enterprise resources around centers of excellence, for example, and shared platforms. What surprised me a little bit was when we got to the far right-hand side of this maturity assessment, a surprisingly large number, about 14%, claimed to be consistently disrupting their enterprise business models using artificial intelligence and data analytics. Now, is that hubris? Perhaps. There's obviously always an element of that in any self-reported survey. But I think it really reflects the fact that we were talking to a sample of leaders to begin with. So to some extent, that 14% is not reflective of the entire population as a whole, but probably is indicative of, say, the top 20% of people in the marketplace. Now, the reality of these different maturity levels varies widely across different industries. And, you've got industries like healthcare and telco, to some extent financial services, that are relatively more advanced. And across countries too, which are, places like Singapore, South Korea, even China, that are to some extent pulling away from other countries in many regards. Now, it's not really enough to talk about where an organization sits in terms of its AI or its analytics capabilities. What's more important really is what's stopping it from improving its capabilities. So we actually asked data scientists what factors were actively discouraging them from investing in AI and data science, or what was actually causing their existing AI projects to fail to meet their initial expectations. And this, by the way, our definition of success or failure was the inability to meet expectations. And I think that's an important definition because unlike most software projects, AI is helped, or perhaps it's plagued, by somewhat unrealistic expectations. And I think those expectations, as we'll see in many locations, are actually getting the way of success in leading an AI journey. Now, these factors that slowed either investment or implementation success bundle into three basic types. First of all, there were issues around data capabilities that the organization has. There were issues about people, in some cases, skills, for example, the availability of relatively expensive data scientists. Finally, issues around technologies. Now, different industries and different countries highlighted different issues discouraging AI investment or delaying AI success. We tended to find, for instance, that skills issues, people issues, were often the most important on a country-by-country basis. But there were some specific areas that were really driven by industry or even the cultural aspects of that particular nation. For example, in Australia and New Zealand, data governance and quality issues, data quality management issues were deemed as being most important, reflecting, I would argue, probably the relatively stronger compliance culture in Australasia. In very expensive, high salary locations like Singapore, like Hong Kong, like Japan, you tended to find people-related issues being the most important. So, for example, we saw 40% of Hong Kong data scientists reporting a lack of collaboration across different business units, different data science units. Now, I thought this was interesting because that also reflects the preponderance of financial services in Hong Kong. And very often in financial services, they tend to have somewhat distributed data science and analytics capabilities, often organized around, say, business intelligence, for instance. In Singapore, we saw things which, again, if you're familiar with Singapore, it's a very top-down culture. Things tend to come from the senior management team, the senior executives, often from government. In Singapore, we saw something like 40% of data scientists actually report unrealistic expectations of management regarding AI as being one of the major barriers to making AI successful. In fact, as somebody who's gone through, I think it's 3 AI winters and counting, I think the expectations is probably one of the biggest single issues that kind of gets in the way. If you've got very high expectations, it's very difficult to always achieve them. Now, when we looked at basic technology issues, they tended to surface most clearly in countries that are very early on in the data science journey, often where the skills aren't, frankly, that much available to begin with, or they haven't got the infrastructure to support them. And here I think of countries like Indonesia. Again, there's some strange exceptions. I mean, Indonesia, in many ways, is sort of bifurcated into 2 distinct groups. You've got a very successful, very aggressive, digital-enabled platform-based companies, the Grabs and the Travelocas and the like, who are doing great things in terms of building their AI platforms and building upon them. But then there's also a great mass of companies that are much further behind. And something similar can be said of Malaysia as well. So if we turn to the next slide, which really explores one of those themes a little bit more in detail, different stages of AI maturity really highlight different issues over time too. So first and foremost, people and skill-related issues seem to be consistently viewed as the most important. And again, that perhaps shouldn't surprise any of us particularly. And this is true at all stages of AI adoption. Technology-related issues seem to become or be viewed as most important early on in the development journey. But we noticed that as technology decisions were made, they steadily became less important, less critical over time. And this is quite in contrast to data-related issues, which again, if it makes some sense, related issues tend to get more important as time goes by, as the scale and the scope of data science activities increases in the organization. And data quality, for example, data integrity, data trust, these all become more important, not less important. Now, we don't really have time to talk about the myriad specific initiatives that we have different respondents about. You can read this in the info brief that you can download from Dataiku. But at each stage of the AI maturity, different initiatives did seem to help to address the data, the technology, and the people-related issues that we identified in the previous slide. For example, initiatives like the Center of Excellence, where in places where data science skills are in really short supply, Center of Excellence can help consolidate and actually concentrate scarce resources on problems that really matter for the enterprise as a whole. Another initiative related to the Center of Excellence is actually the development of citizen data scientists. And usually this comes after the development of the Center of Excellence, precisely because we want to get away from the challenges imposed on us by over-centralization of scarce resources. And we do that to some extent by trying to democratize the skills and capabilities in the form of tools like auto and machine learning, distributed business intelligence, all these sort of capabilities that are used to enable what a citizen data scientist can actually bring to the table. So another important initiative that we saw that seemed to make a big difference, quite frankly, is the ability to have collaboration tools. And collaboration tools that really support coordination across, first of all, different steps within the sort of data science lifecycle, the model lifecycle, all the way from the initial identification of an opportunity, all the way through moving into production. So that lifecycle management aspect of data management, or data modeling, I should say, is an important thing that's got to be supported, and that actually makes a big difference. It also makes a big difference in the sense that it supports collaboration across very different internal specialists. I mean, we've seen again and again that data scientists in the early stages of their sort of AI maturity journey suffer greatly from a sort of what I call a sort of Ivory Tower mentality that frankly can only be solved by getting these data scientists to work on real business problems with real problem owners who understand the realities of what it takes to make that problem useful in the business. They understand the operational processes associated with that particular problem area. They understand the specifics of what the customers are looking for, the market requirements. And what we notice is that as you sort of mature, this problem of coordination between different specialists only gets worse because, data scientists coming up with an abstract, a theoretical model that's tested on some historical data set is all very well. But moving into production is quite another kettle of fish. Before they can go into production, they've got to be able to work well with other groups, usually within IT for the most part. Data engineers, business analysts, DevOps, security people, all of whom have got their own separate and quite proud specialties and their turf that they're looking to protect within the enterprise. Now, these different areas, if you like, can quickly come into conflict if you're not careful. For example, there's always the danger that, for instance, centers of excellence can actually increase the prestige or the special status of data scientists. And this can actually get in the way, to some extent, of the sort of collaboration across, particularly across IT, that's needed to be effective. Now, finally, another common theme of companies that made it from the left side all the way to the right side of this data science maturity journey is frankly their commitment to a strategic approach to leveraging the data that they have, the technologies that they have, and the skills, the data science skills, the AI capabilities within some sort of enterprise platform. And I'm not just talking technology, although that's obviously an important part of it, for the benefit of the whole organization. Now, IDC and my team, we strongly believe that AI and analytics operating on very large data sets can support value-added business applications that can really create strategic advantages for the business as a whole. But it can only do this by building positive feedback loops of enterprise learning, that learning about customers' changing expectations, the internal organization's changing operational needs, the changing data that they gather, and also learning from how to improve the enterprise analytics and the enterprise applications on a single enterprise platform. That, it seems to us, is very much the future of where successful data science and AI applications are going to go. Now, I hope, first of all, I hope this has given you some food for thought and some ideas about how your colleagues in other industries and other countries are coming to terms with their data sciences, their data science challenges. Thank you so much for your attention. I do appreciate that. Now I'm going to pass over to Richard and to Ewen, if he's back, who will talk a little bit more about how these quite general trends, admittedly, which are explored much more in the info brief that you can download, are being worked out on a day-to-day reality of data scientists on the coalface of modern enterprises. With that, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. So just a bit of an introduction about myself. So I'm Vice President for Asia Pacific and Japan for Dataiku. I have 20 plus years in the data and analytics space, starting with a technical focus in delivery, and I've been both in customer land as an implementation consultant and a purchaser of technology, and culminating into driving enterprise scale of disruptive technologies across Asia Pacific from a sales side of the fence, and that's where I find myself today here in Dataiku. So I think it would be very apt for me to then open up with a little bit of a contradictory statement here, which is the burden of existing purchase methods in correlation to the shifting change that we see with the rapid adoption of enterprise AI, or AI as a pervasive strategy in an organization. And there's two themes that I wanted to kind of contrast and bring to bear here through the next 10 minutes or so. And that is a little bit to discuss around the shift moving away from RFP and the elusive use case purchase. And the reason why I wanted to bring this into bear is we see an overall trend when we talk about maturity, and as Chris highlighted around his case study here, that you have simplicity and then you have disruptiveness on two extreme scales. And we see this trend of change happen between RFP strategy, which I think is a very traditional approach for buying technology, and then the use case driven purchase strategy. So what I'd like to kind of just move through the journey here and anchor the conversation around these 2 points. But first off, let's level up and level set with what we believe enterprise AI is and some of our core beliefs. So foundationally, it's about empowering an organization in a transformation journey. So embedding AI across the enterprise and aligning it to all business units, all business processes, all business decisions, and aiding an enterprise to transform, bringing all of the relevant stakeholders together to try and remove the barriers of technology. It's about ensuring that there is transparency, auditability, and traceability across your organizational decisions, whether that is from your end-to-end data flows, your end-to-end data cataloging, to your data models and the advanced analytics you may be deploying. And it's really, for me, culminates in creating the robustness of an enterprise business decisioning strategy. And so that gives us a level view of our beliefs of what AI is. So let me paraphrase this then into how we see the journey and the phases of growth into enterprise AI. And it was really interesting to see the results from the study that highlights in Asia Pacific about 50% of organizations are in the early phase, which is simply experimenting or slowly multiplying. And we see this categorization, we probably all have heard the term big data, and that's kind of day zero of what AI was about, and that's the growth phase of modernizing the data warehouse technology stack. But we'd like to think that the initiation and the impact phase is where we correlate the 50% of Asia Pacific businesses. And I'd like to kind of highlight here that we have seen a trend across North America and EMEA in this phase where there has been a shift out of using RFPs and much more focused on use case driven evaluation of technologies, with a focus, and this is where as we shift up our maturity model here between acceleration and systemization in that operationalization phase. And what do we mean by operationalization? For us, this is taking the desire of experiments and progressing it through into production states. And that means you're constantly leveraging your data sets and your organization skills, your people, and the technology landscapes to the most effectiveness. But with the one constant that we talk about, and this is in a productive fashion, and productivity ultimately aligns to time. And so as we go up our maturity model, which is systemization and into enterprise AI, and Chris rightly pointed out that 14% in the constantly disrupt scale may be on the high side, which is probably a proportion of the survey environment, that we have a survey that is looking at experts and customers that have a matured state. Certainly we see there are very, very few organizations, and this is a global statement as well, that have reached enterprise AI maturity, where we would class them as having AI embedded in all business processes across all business units, aiding business decisions and driving advanced analytics. With that said, let's kind of talk about what the one thing here that drives the transformation cycle, and I think it's point to say here agility and complexity, and this could be paradigmed with simplicity and experimenting and consistently disrupting. We do live in a constant changing world, and I think COVID has highlighted more than anything how a disruptive change can impact businesses. And I truly believe as well what Chris is saying, that AI is not a simply transactional view. It's a long-term strategy, and it's about business transformation. And so if we look at the cycle of change in a virtuous cycle, to transform business processes, we first must understand how the data is correlated into our process, and we must document and understand the decisions that are made through a process, and kind of map how a decision could be aided or automated by AI, and or what the data elements that are around that decision can then be supporting an analytical understanding of the business. And this is a vicious cycle as well, in that we continually improve through change. And through that continual improvement, we need to continually change. And so there is never an end to the requirement of AI in an enterprise. But bringing this together is the challenge. And if we paradigm this with a shift from away from RFP into use case style purchasing, what we start seeing here is that collaboration is at the core of business agility, and not all collaboration is equal. And so from a Dataiku perspective, we look to be the harmonization of a collaborative data science platform, which brings the ability for end-to-end solutions across the enterprise. And let's talk about what that might look like a little bit, bringing in some different personas. So we've spoken about the data scientists, and Chris mentioned the maturity of how data scientists evolve. So you have your hardcore data scientists, and you have your citizen data scientists, and potentially your organizational design strategy needs to adopt and evolve through the journey into citizen data scientists, so that the COE is an important factor of leveraging those scarce resources. We have the business owner, which in some context could also be the subject matter expert or the application owner. And these folks are the ones that understand the business processes. And again, they're generally going to be drivers of advanced analytics or business improvement strategy. We have the data analyst, which sits at the crux of understanding how all of this data in the organization connects together to create a data science driven action. And then we have the last bastion, which is a key factor in the success of enterprise deployments, which is ensuring models are operationalized within the landscape of an IT framework. So you've got to consider all of your security, your ever-changing IT landscapes and technology landscapes, and the ever-changing regulations that sit around all of these things. So as we talk a little bit about each one of these, what brings the journey together, and this is why the burden of sometimes the traditional RFP-driven purchase strategy makes it challenging, because this requirement of different business users versus the technology competency really is about understanding that there is no one size fits all. There are many use cases that exist in an enterprise, and you cannot capture that through an RFP strategy many times. And so an evaluation of technology needs to embrace different business stakeholders and different use cases. So if we take the business owner, generally they're looking for the advanced analytic output of the journey. They're looking at how they get involved in the process, and they're trying to understand what that might look like. If we take the data analyst, they're the ones dealing with all of the data issues that exist within the enterprise. And Chris rightly highlighted, there are varying degrees of maturity in the data governance, the data catalog, the data dictionary management strategies across different countries within Asia Pacific. That in and of itself creates a differentiated approach to how you would look to utilize AI in an organization. Obviously, the more mature your data governance and data maturity is, the easier and simpler it may be to establish enterprise AI. And so having this understanding is a critical component to driving a purchase decision of these sorts of technologies. So a key thing here is to utilize a shift between a traditional approach, which may have been an ETL or data integration, into a self-service strategy, which enables the data analysts at the coalface to utilize data as they need it. So I like to call this, it's getting the data to the right person in the right way to make the right decisions at the right time. The democratization of the data scientist by the utilization of auto ML is certainly helping progress getting that access to data in the right decision, in the right person at the right time, and bringing this in a collaborative way, but not ignoring the key data scientist function, and bringing the technologies to the use cases that these individuals like to work around. So it's not about changing a competency or capability, it's about embracing. And if we correlate this to the sort of 50% across Asia Pacific of companies in the early stages, this kind of brings us into the coalfield, where we see that there are an awful lot of organizations that have data scientists that are coders. And they like to work in their own tools, whether that is writing Python and using Jupyter notebooks and such like. And to embrace a paradigm shift that brings in the business user and then brings in the IT needs as well, is a critical requirement that we see as a shift up that journey to get to accelerated output. And so, in summary of all these sorts of things, I think the key thing here is collaboration sits at the core of the adoption to enterprise AI. Not all collaboration is the same, but understanding the needs from an end-to-end perspective in the enterprise is a critical thing. And driving the elusive use case through a collaborative data science platform, we believe creates value across the enterprise. So with that, I'll close up and hand over to Ewen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chris. I'd like to hear Ewen Plougastel to join the conversation for this Q&A session. Ewen, can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Richard, for the very insightful presentations. Maybe I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Ewen Plougastel. I've been working for Accenture for the past 15 years. My focus is innovation and transformation with data, with analytics, and AI. So I'm very, very delighted to be part of the Q&A of the webinar today, because we've got some very, very interesting topics to discuss all together. So let's go to it. I want to start with the elephant in the room question. And I would like Chris to share your thoughts on the COVID situation. Do you think the current COVID situation is going to accelerate the adoption of AI for the organizations in this part of the world? What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
Hi, Ewan. It's always amazing how quickly, in any conversation you have these days, how little time you have to wait before the word COVID-19 is mentioned. So, but in answer to your question, I think the honest response, frankly, is yes and no. I think AI is going to be both helped and hindered by the COVID-19 pandemic situation. I mean, much depends, obviously, on the nature of the industry, the business priorities and the relevant to that particular country. I mean, after all, different countries have very different stages of the pandemic. And in some industries, for example, like e-retail or logistics or healthcare, AI is already deeply embedded in the response, frankly. But in other industries, especially in the early stages of the pandemic response, AI is obviously going to take a backstage position, in my view. I mean, things like work from home, connectivity, business continuity, obviously going to be more of a priority, at least in the very near term. But let's not kid ourselves. This is not going to last forever, I don't believe. As time passes, you're going to see the emphasis move away from surviving the sort of the economic fallout of the pandemic towards productivity improvements and things like cloud and personalization of the customer digital experience that, frankly, everybody now has to have if they're going to be viable in this sort of economy. And a lot of the new AI use cases start to become extremely relevant. In the long term, at IDC, we actually do believe that the pandemic only speeds up the process of digitization. Digitization in terms of the customer experience, in terms of operational processes. And it's this that is the sort of raw material, if you like, for AI. Because AI is, at least in part, largely driven by data, internal data about operational processes, external data about digital interactions that the customer has with the company. So it may be that in a year or two's time, we're actually further along than we would have been had COVID-19 not occurred. So COVID-19 might actually stimulate rather than sort of impede AI development in the region. And especially in some countries more than others. I mean, places where you've got high labor costs, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, it's only going to push it further. It's certainly not going to slow it down.
Yes, I completely agree, Chris. And when I talk to my clients, they still keep talking about AI. And AI is not a new topic for them. You're right. But what has been very interesting in that in the past 2 months, since we have the pandemic, we've got different types of conversation around AI. Some new use cases have come up. There are a lot of demands around AI for supply chain or supply chain optimization. AI, how to use AI for business resilience, how to use AI for workforce reallocation, how to use AI in a better way for cybersecurity. So actually, there is still a very strong demand of AI. And what is very, very interesting is that the scope of the use case is getting broader and broader. And what is very interesting to see as well is that the business who have been the least impacted or who have been the most resistant during this COVID situation are all the organizations, all the companies that leverage data, automation, artificial intelligence. There's a common pattern that we have seen in the past few weeks.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, Richard, please.
So I totally agree with the statements that Chris and yourself have said here. We see two sides. That there is absolutely, I think it's an old thing and not a new thing as well, that a crisis creates decisions and progresses movement and opportunity. And we've seen in certain industries as well, where people may think that this wouldn't happen, but for instance, in the airline industry, that there has been more utilization of our platforms, not less. And I think that also akins exactly to your point there, Ewen, that supply chain and the supply chain use cases is certainly an area that we have seen significant focus and improvement in terms of wanting to drive AI into far more detailed business process execution across enterprises that are involved in it. What we have also seen as well, and I think it akin to what Chris is saying, is that the business continuity and resilience clearly was at large enterprise a critical factor that drove prioritization and refocus. What we have seen as a general trend is, with the work from home style environment, and if we could akin this to having more hours available for work activity due to less travel and less movement, this has actually opened up digital time being available for project evaluation and activities. So as you rightly said, Chris, as well, we've seen a shift from companies, whilst the budget spend may be deprioritized in terms of specific project, the desire and the engagement of time spent to understand how and why has significantly increased. And so I only see that this is a good thing in general for the progression and the movement of AI across industries.
And back to your point, Richard, for an organization or a company who is new to AI, or maybe at the beginning of its journey, what would be the best way to start? Because there are two schools of thought. There is a Big Bang approach that we hear sometimes, and there is another approach which is more around the start small and scale later. What would be your recommendation, Richard, based on what you see in the market?
Great question, Ewan. And I think I'll answer that with there is no one size that fits all, and it would really depend upon what the organizational DNA and procurement stroke need and desire exist around. We see within very large enterprise the start small and scale up within many different business units in an enterprise, and then the realization that there are multiple or many projects underway independently of each other, and there is very little alignment across a lens at the enterprise. And as that bubbles up and surfaces, then they shift to a much more formalized engagement strategy. And then we see the complete opposite, where there is also smaller style organizations that have the ability to understand the total need and engage at a platform first approach. I also think there is, the conversation that we should have around on this as well, the cloud native versus the non-cloud native, and how they look at AI and utilize data differently, and the challenges that surface and come about within the enterprise from those style companies. And Chris kind of highlighted, I think, two local companies that are phenomenal ones to talk around, the Grab Taxis of the world and the Travelocos of the world, which are, I would say, cloud native, digital first enterprises, versus a traditional bricks and mortar bank, perhaps.
Yes, Richard, when you talk about digital first companies, my immediate reaction or my immediate question is, who is supposed to drive AI in a company? Who should be the sponsor? Should be the business team, should be the IT team, should be, I don't know, the innovation team, or maybe this is more a question for Chris. Who do you think will be the right driver, the right sponsor for AI at the enterprise level?
Do you want me to respond, or I'm not sure? I'm happy to take that question. I mean, one thing that we're seeing, and ironically, I think COVID-19 has sped this process up. It's highlighted the distinction between digitally enabled and non-digitally enabled enterprises. And for that very reason, it's less of a skunkworks activity to develop AI. And I think more and more you're going to see business driving AI deployment and development. And I think that's a good thing. One thing that I find very conspicuous, I do a lot of work with banks and manufacturing companies. In banks, you tend to find non-engineering trained senior managers and executives. So they tend to come from a humanities background, or perhaps arts or whatever. In manufacturing companies, you tend to find engineers. And I'm always struck by the fact that engineers as senior executives and managers seem to get AI much better than, I would say, non-science or data literate kind of areas. I hope I'm not saying something out of school here, but I think it's true. I think that one reason that manufacturing companies are really speeding up quite dramatically in terms of their AI capabilities for logistics, for supply chain and the like, is precisely because they've got executives who understand the value that data can create and the usefulness of models. In some industries, that's not the case. And I think that highlights the importance of a business-led AI development strategy.
Yes, completely. I I fully agree with you. And I've seen many AI projects in many different industries for many different clients. And typically, the AI projects that will succeed are the ones which are business-led. Why? Because they've got a very clear use case, a very clear problem to solve. And they use technology, so they leverage AI to solve a business problem. So it's not a sandpit where you got a bunch of people playing with the latest technologies and try new things. To be successful, you need in AI, you need to be very, very clear on what you want to achieve. How are you going to measure the success? So it's all about value realization. How are you going to realize the value for the enterprise, for the business teams? So I completely agree that typically the AI projects that will succeed are the ones with a clear purpose, a clear business purpose. I fully agree with that. This leads actually to my next question. If you want your enterprise to be successful with AI, what would be the secret recipe to include the people dimension? Because as we just discussed, it cannot be just a pure technical or technology play. People, process are very, very important in the equation. So what would be the secret recipe to include the people in the AI projects?
So I'll take a stab at that, Ewen. And I think it foundationally comes from a place of business transformation, which is a constant. Technology changes over time, but business transformation and particularly at large enterprise is a very, very people-centric problem to solve. We have seen a shift in many different organizational design models in the last 3 to 5 years, and different ways of calling these things out. And I think one of the new modern ways of looking at things is if you look at the creation of tribes and a tribal-driven organization where the tribe collectively amalgamates to solve a business problem, and the leaders of the tribe emerge because they are passionate about driving an outcome and a change. And if we look at that shift where we fundamentally that is about the people, it's then understanding the skills gap delta across organization. There's a very large pharmaceutical company that, as part of their digital transformation, actually they started first off by creating an entire organizational catalog of what their current skills state was. They then created their future skill state, and they then mapped out the job function role strategy of what they will no longer need, i.e. potentially being automated out as a skill, and what they are going to futurely need. And then they also then put that out to the organization and said, here is what won't exist in the future, and here is what we are going to need, and here is a path and a journey to get there. And that was foundationally built around the impact of AI and automation on the enterprise. And so I think it's a really great question, and it's a really difficult one to try and say, what is the secret recipe? I think if there was a secret recipe, it wouldn't be secret, and everybody would be using it. And we would see significantly more people beyond the simple experiment and the slowly multiply to the consistently disrupt.
Yes, completely agree. And I will pause here for 1 minute because we've got a question from the audience. And by the way, I would like to encourage everybody in the webinar to post questions. We are live and we are very happy to take any question now real time. We've got a first question for Chris. Chris, the question is, how can you avoid the Ivory Tower problem? It seems pretty impossible regarding the innovative nature of this kind of projects.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to some extent, ideas like the Center of Excellence can certainly help a little bit in this regard, because it means that executives, senior executives, need to take AI seriously. But before they can do that, they've got to have sensible expectations as to what it can and cannot do. I think we're getting a lot better about this, frankly, in the region and globally. You're not seeing quite so many headlines about, will AI take all our jobs? But rather, it's more nuanced and it's more subtle. It's going to change everybody's jobs, but actually probably reduce the total number of jobs identified, simply because although it may impact a fraction of everybody's time, it's not going to actually remove all the tasks that any one of us can do because of the complexity and the sophistication of the nature of the tasks that we have to face. And I think executives are slowly realizing this, and they're also starting to realize that AI has got a strategic role rather than just a narrow functional or use case based role. They realize that there is this virtuous circle that that Richard talked about of gathering data, of building applications that leverage that data, of value added applications based on that data, on the analytics within that data, on the top of that data, and then value add that is used to justify more data, and so it goes. So that story is a very credible business story. And frankly, it's one that the Googles and the Amazons of this world, and the Grabs and the like, have all got down pat, partly because they were born, digitally native. But I think this digital transformation story is an underlying theme of a lot of what's going on within AI. If you're not moving to some sort of complete digital transformation of the enterprise, AI is irrelevant, frankly. I mean, you're missing the giant in the room. You've got to have that underlying digital platform in order to support any of these AI initiatives. And I actually suggest that AI data scientist teams, they should actually make sure that they're aligned with whatever digital transformation journeys your enterprises are on, because that, in one sense, is the future. I mean, I'm always reminded of, 100 years ago, there used to be a chief telephony officer in big railway companies in the US. And that was because it was a new technology that people thought was going to revolutionize the enterprise. The reality is, AI will be another technology, a very useful technology, and it will transform how organizations work. But we won't view it as an end in itself. We'll view it as a means to an end. And that's the right way to go.
Yes, and Chris, you talk about the AICOE, the Center of Excellence for AI, which I think is a fascinating topic. And I would like to ask you two questions on that. First question is, how do you measure the success of an AICOE? And my second question, which is back to something we discussed just before, is where the AICOE should sit in the organization.
Well, personally, I think COE is a solution to a particular, frankly, a temporary problem. I don't see it as a permanent solution. Just like, as I mentioned before, the idea of a telephony COE would be a bit ridiculous, right? It's a set of technologies for which we have scarce resources. And for that reason, we need to concentrate the resources we have to focus on the most important and high value added projects. As time goes by, these skills will become ubiquitous and they'll be distributed through the entire organization. And when that happens, the rationale for COE doesn't exist anymore. Maybe the COE will become a model governance team, for example. That's in banks, you're already seeing some of that. So they're doing more model governance and model management rather than what I'd call development. So in terms of the KPIs for COE, it's got to be about innovation. It's got to be number of models. It's got to be, innovative technologies deployed. These sort of KPIs, temporary KPIs, are going to be the ones that you want to focus on. And you've got to plan for the end game. The end game is that there won't be COEs in the long term. I mean, who knows when that is. But in the long term, you have to think in terms of the technology embedded in everything we do. And there won't be dedicated high priests that look after the technology for us. This is my view anyway, so it'd be good to have a discussion.
To be honest, I would echo what you said. And that's why I don't want to talk about project when we talk about AI. Because when you talk about project, it means that it has a start and it has an end.
And it's also got to be a portfolio approach, right? You've got to have any single project, you can't guarantee success in any AI project, realistically. So instead, you have to think of, the balance of successes versus failures. And that means you've got to have a portfolio view of how well the COE is doing.
Completely. It means that AI needs to be embedded within the organization. So AICOE an AI project are a good way to start because you need to start somewhere. But from a strategic perspective, for the long term, you will not need to have AICOE anymore. You will not need to have AI project because AI needs to be embedded in anything you do in the organization, for any department, for supply chain, for HR, for sales, for marketing. So we need to leave AI.
Is my view. I think I don't know, it depends on the organization, but we're a ways from getting to that point yet.
Yes, it's a journey, of course. We are already running out of time. So one last question for the two of you, Chris and Richard. So maybe we'll start with you, Richard. Richard, what are the top 3 advice you would give to an organization which is about to start their journey towards enterprise AI?
Hi, Ewen. Sorry, I lost the connection there. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, no, we're about to wrap up. And we would like to, I wanted to ask you and Chris, in just 3 words, the top 3 advice to give to any client or any organization who want to move towards enterprise AI. The 3 things they should have in mind.
Sure. Think enterprise as a journey and not a project. Embrace the personas required across the enterprise, and don't assume one size fits all.
Okay, very clear, and I would echo the same advice. What about you, Chris?
Richard stole on all the good points. I would actually echo something that came out in the survey, which maybe is not obvious. Think about the technology platform earlier rather than later, because frankly, you're going to have to live with this for quite a long time. And people, data scientists included, are creatures of habit. So they get used to certain technologies and platforms. And once they get used to them, they don't really like moving away from them. So try to get as good a platform as you can early rather than later, because you're going to have to live with it.
Okay, and I will give my 3 advice as well. Is number 1, start with a very clear use case, a business use case. That's very important. Make sure that the AI is not a technology play, but it's a business play. Number 2, as I said before, it's not a project. It doesn't have a start and an end. It has to be embedded in the organization. And my 3rd advice, think about the people. We always think that AI is just technology, but no. AI is all about the people, the processes supported by technology. So this will be my 3 advice. It's time to wrap up. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Richard. It was a very, very insightful session. First with your presentations, and then with this Q&A at the end. Thank you, everybody. And thanks again for attending the webinar. And there will be a link communicated later for you to replay or rewatch the webinar later. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ewan. Thanks, Chris.